afternoon and welcome to the Restart Michigan webinar, Top 10 Cyber and Privacy Topics for 2021. I'm Lori Ostro, I'm the Senior Director of Engagement with the Detroit Regional Chamber, and we thank you for joining us today. The Chamber launched this series of webinars to help businesses across the state prepare to restart operations, return to work, and help their business. I'd like to thank our guest speakers from Clark Hill for volunteering their time today and to share their expertise. Before we get started, I wanted to make you aware that all participants are on mute, but you do have the opportunity to ask questions through the GoToWebinar box on the right of your screen through the question box. All questions will be taken at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to enter your questions throughout. We will be monitoring them. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and turn the webinar over to Melissa with Clark Hill.
Great, thank you, Lori. So thank you everyone for attending, and wanted to thank Machado for giving us this opportunity to talk about a subject that both Jeffrey and I are very passionate about. I am an attorney. I am the business unit leader for Clark Hill's Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Practice Group. This is 100% of what I do. We help clients identify, mitigate, and respond to risks when dealing with computers or systems or technology. Jeffrey, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Jeffrey Wells. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Consulting, and I am not an attorney. I'm a technologist, although I've spent enough time over the last almost 2.5 years with Melissa that I'm starting to think and write like an attorney. But my focus is totally on operationalizing cyber and technology for better use.
So just a little cartoon to get us started. If anyone, it alerts us if anyone accidentally tries to send confidential data to a private email address. Obviously, it's a good thing to protect your systems. So, what's the agenda today? So we're going to talk a little bit about what the cyber threat landscape looks like, and then we're going to run through at least what we have identified as the top 10 cyber and privacy topics for 2021. I think ransomware and extortion is top of mind for everyone. Phishing, spear phishing, Internet of Things, social engineering. We'll talk a little bit about data collection, aggregation, and use. We'll briefly touch on remote computing, but most people have talked about that, I think, at this particular point in time. Training and awareness, legal compliance, data protections and regulations, and what that means to you, and then supply chain risk. And then finally, number 10, if you do nothing else, if you wait until the end, we'll have some of the must-take steps you should do right now in order to help you protect yourself. So cyber attacks 101, what are they? Well, it's really when you have somebody using technology or systems in order to attack a company, usually for some sort of financial or profitable reason, such as compromising intellectual property and misusing that, encrypting data encrypting data, I guess, in place, and looking at that from a ransomware perspective, doing wire fraud, social engineering. But it's really important to remember, and we're still having the conversation, that this isn't just an IT problem, this is an enterprise problem, and that it really needs to be addressed at the top levels, not just at compartmentalizing and pushing it over to IT. If we look at this only from an IT perspective, we've missed the ball, and we're missing 70% of the conversation. And really looking at, when you're looking at cyber attacks, or you're looking at cybersecurity and privacy, it's really the intersection of people, policy, or process, and technology. You really don't have a good system if you only have technology, or you only have process, or you only have people. You really have to understand where that intersection is of these particular, excuse the wrong word there, of these particular items, in order to make sure that you are being resilient, identifying the risks, enabling yourself to take advantage of some of the opportunities that come your way from technology and data. Oops, sorry. Jeffrey, do you want to talk about?
Sure. Maybe you did use the right word there, interception. I mean, that's a cyber attack, cyber threat is the interception of people, policy, and technology. Back in 1993, there was a New Yorker caption cartoon that said on the internet, "No one knows you're a dog." That not much has changed since 1993 from that perspective. Although in today's world, they may not always know who you are, but when they do know who you are, they can find you. And the sophistication of the attacks has gone up. And so there are attacks of opportunity, which are the result of casting a wide net, just sending out something for an attack, and then directed attacks looking at you or your particular organization for something very specific. About 71% is from the FBI. About 71% of attacks are financially motivated, and the other 25% are motivated by espionage. And in that, of that 100%, 55% of the attacks are coming from cyber criminals. So the cyber criminals are growing in sophistication. They're working with nation states, working for individuals. So you don't even have to be sophisticated or even care about technology. You can target a particular company or entity and by using what's called an attack as a service. So I can go online and choose and want a ransomware attack against Melissa so that she can buy me a cup of coffee or something. But it's very becoming very sophisticated from an attack perspective. It's growing leaps and bounds. Certainly this year it has, and just even since August, there was a cyber criminal group that was working in ransomware that has just over the last week donated portions of their proceeds to charity. So the criminals are there is sort of a weird sensation of there may be honor amongst the criminal side.
So just continuing the topic a little bit, there's some surveys out there that have looked at the types of concerns. I mean, obviously automotive professionals have concerns their organizations' practices are not keeping pace with evolving technologies. I think that's a very realistic and accurate concern, especially when there's so many other things that you're focusing on in today's world that in some respects we really didn't consider or anticipate, such as this whole remote workforce, people returning from the remote workforce. And so it is a concern that organizations are aware of. I think they're struggling a little bit with how to address that. And then even though it says post-coronavirus, we're really not post yet, but cyber attacks are up 400%. And as we sit here right now, since we've begun, there's been several companies who've probably been hit by ransomware. Ransomware in 2021 is expected to attack an organization every 11 seconds. So just think about that. Every 11 seconds, ransomware is expected to attack or hit or propagate through an organization. And we're not just saying within the US, we're saying pretty much worldwide. But that is just tells you how prolific this type of ransomware as a service or the cyber attacks are really becoming.
And in the threat landscape, cybersecurity, privacy, and data really has risen into importance in the automotive industry, especially as it undergoes the transformation driven by the collection of data and the use of that data, as well as any automation that goes into the vehicles, as well as new personal mobility concepts and user convenience, connectivity, vehicle electrification. I can go on and on, certainly with this particular audience, but that this goes back that the threat is anything that's got electricity and the microprocessor is at risk.
So what's at stake? I mean, we really talk about, a lot of times we talk about cyber or privacy from an attack perspective or from a disclosure perspective. So what does it look like when you get attacked? How do you respond? How do you recover? What kind of penalties or fines are you looking at? If data is disclosed, how is it going to impact your organization? How is it going to impact your business partners? But there's a whole use operations and innovation concept really when we're looking at technology and when we're looking at data, and really understanding how the technology fits on your operations. A lot of times we have systems that we've developed over time that may be legacy, and then we start to try in some of these additional type of tools or new bells and whistles, if you will, that provide you with a different additional clarity or a different way to look at how you can really use data, use technology to drive efficiency, to drive innovation, to develop new products, to go to the market in different ways, to understand what your market is really looking at and ensure that you're addressing whatever their particular concerns are. And if we're not really using technology or the security side of it or the privacy side or the data correctly, we're going to miss opportunities. And so it's really understanding what your ecosystem looks like and what your basically what your industry is concerned with and what the topics are, and not looking at just 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, but taking that future look at where your industry is driving to. And when you're really literally driving to, and when you're really looking at the automotive industry, I mean, pretty soon we're going to have our whole entire house in the middle of our car. We're going to be able to do pretty much everything or anything that we ever wanted to do from the car, because everything is more about the bells and whistles that you can share, or the connections that you have, or the opportunities, or the data that you can use, or if you're out of the office, how can you take care of a presentation if you need to? I mean, it's a little scary thinking about everything that you're going to be able to do in the car, especially as we move to this concept of self-driving automobiles.
And from a reduction in cost perspective is that proactive thought around the data and privacy, and then securing that data and ensuring the privacy around those. Money spent proactively certainly has a reduction in costs, as well as any potential costs that relate to fines should there be an incident. And that the nice thing though about technologies and the intersections and of humans is that it does bring real economies of scale and true efficiencies, and those efficiencies bring with them remarkable opportunities for growth and innovation, as Melissa said, and also a tremendous opportunity to be resilient and adaptive to new changes and to new threats. No longer is it a singular threat from maybe perhaps a particular market threat, but we have environmental as well as health and a whole host of others, as well as cyber threats. And so being resilient to those is also an important piece that's at stake here, is being able to recover from whatever it is.
So, continuing kind of the discussion when you're looking at cyber and privacy, what's at stake? Really, there's a number of things at stake if you're, regardless of whether you're suffering from some sort of cyber attack, you've had some sort of human error issue, some program or software or product that you've developed isn't working the way that it should, or somebody is using it in a way that it really wasn't intended to be used as well. There's a variety of different things that are at stake. Business interruption is huge. If you're hit by, say, again, a ransomware attack or a system interruption, thinking about the amount of time that's going to take you to come back up, what are your people doing? How much do you have to pay them? Do you have backups? Does it impact your data? Have they messed with your code? We are seeing attackers nowadays where they get source code and they're actually going in and manipulating the source code in ways that the company doesn't even realize from kind of the downstream perspective. So there's a significant cost factor when you're looking at cyber attacks or system interruptions from a business interruption cost perspective.
And certainly with business interruption, it brings a whole host of concerns around brand reputation, whether that be just for the fact that the time is down, that you're not operational, it's leaked through bad actors, or eventually hits the press as to what happened, and that the brand takes a hit no matter what you're making for that during that period of time, and especially if that the impact hits your customers or the consumer safety aspects, and with the changing of code and the interplay of many connected pieces of software that come into this, as well as all of the processes and technologies that come together. The consumer safety obviously is incredibly important and has long been an important aspect of the automotive industry, as has brand. And so when you tie those two together, there's a significant amount at stake that is hard to quantify in dollars.
Just real quick, touching on the kind of the cost associated with a security incident or data breach. I mean, just to put this in context, we're going to talk about ransomware a little bit more in depth here very shortly, but we're seeing the demands, or the ransom, if you will, the ransom demands for payment to get a decryption key or to prevent your data from being sold on the dark web going way up. It used to be that the demand would be about $20,000, $10,000. Now we're seeing millions of dollars. We've had companies who have paid $4.3 million for ransom. We've had others that have paid 2.9, 1.9. We've seen ransom demands of 33 million. They just keep going up, and companies keep paying because that's the only way that they can really get access, either A, to their systems, or B, prevent data from being exposed. And in addition to those types of costs, you also have costs from legal fees, forensics. Forensics can be upwards of 6-7 figures in order to do an investigation, identity protection, notification, notifying customers, notifying clients. It can really get very, very expensive very, very quickly if you have to do an investigation or respond to an incident. And we kind of talked a little bit about the business loss aspect in conjunction with the business interruption, but it's really hard to define, because when you're looking at business loss, it's not just I earned X in May and I was down in April, and therefore you should pay me that amount. They're going to look at, the following months. Did you recover? Really, how do you identify and put a number to that? And then how do you identify and put a number to kind of the business loss of your reputation? So these costs are hard to identify in some respects. In other respects, they're very easy, and they grow very, very quickly.
So we touched on the word ransomware. Just want to make sort of a little definition clarifications between ransomware and extortionware. Ransomware is, which has been in place for several years now and is on the rise, is the act of taking over one's system or parts of one system through a phishing campaign, through malware, some other human interference, and where your system becomes encrypted, and the bad actor holds the decryption key and demands money, much as Melissa had said. What we've seen in evolution quite a bit over the last few months is ransomware mixed with extortionware. So that's where the bad actor has encrypted the data, but is leaking information that they have captured while inside your environment, either as proof of life or to ensure that the organization pays the ransom faster than and maybe better than paying someone else to try to recover the encrypted information. So they're using those in combination, which is where we've seen the growth this year specifically.
The other thing we see too with ransomware is if they get in there and they encrypt your systems and you're ignoring them, ignoring the threat actor, and you don't want to pay, or the criminal you don't want to pay, sometimes they'll take other steps to attack your organization, like a DDoS, a denial of service attack, or something else similar. We have seen attackers, so we handled a matter where the client was adamant that they didn't want to engage with the threat actor. The threat actor had said that they had all of their company, employee, customer information. They didn't even want to send them an email or communicate with them, so the threat actor started texting the owners. Owners ignored them. Threat actor then started texting the employees. The employees were instructed to ignore them. Then they had the contact information for the kids, and so they started reaching out to the kids, and at that particular point in time is when the business decided to engage with them in some respects. And it sounds like something out of a movie, but this is we're not making this up. This is what's actually happening. They will look for whatever that pain point is to try to get you to engage with them and pay the ransom. Interestingly enough, there's been some recent guidance that came out from, I believe it's Department of Treasury, about OFAC. It basically talks about how before paying a ransom, you have to make sure that there's a whole process for it. You want to get proof of life, make sure that you can actually do what they say they can, such as decrypting the information. But you also need to, and there's companies that work with this, you also need to make sure that to the extent that you are paying the ransom or threat actor, they're not on the sanctions list, because that can run you into trouble with the federal government, which nobody really wants.
I'd say, and just in the last 6 months, we've seen about a 90% growth in ransomware slash extortionware over last year at this time, which it's just as businesses are trying to recover and reopen, it's incredibly important to keep that in mind, the best ways to avoid those.
It's really important to remember that size of the company does not matter. It does not matter. Attackers are out there and they have automated processes for identifying vulnerabilities or weaknesses that they can then exploit. Or they're getting into the systems of companies that you do business with and then figuring out how they can then attack you and gain access to your system. The size of the company does not matter. It is hitting very small companies, mid-sized companies, very large companies. The thing is, you normally only see it in the news when it's hitting the very large companies because it's newsworthy. But it is hitting small and mid-sized companies just as much, if not more, than the very large companies. And automotive companies, manufacturers, vendors, everyone is a target. This is equal opportunity attacks. They really just don't care what industry you are in. For a period of time during COVID, they did say that they were going to back off of hospital systems, but that has changed, and we are now seeing a plethora of attacks against hospital systems as well. So it really doesn't matter. Companies, regardless of the industry, are targets for cyber attacks. So social engineering. I attended a conference once that was really funny. They were doing a social engineering test. So basically, they had people at the front of the room who were pretending to call. They were calling an actual company and saying, "Hi, this is IT. I just need some information. Can you tell me what the operating system is that you're working on?" And the person that they called at the actual company answered the questions. And they were just showing that you can pretty much call anyone and try to get information from people, and people like to be helpful, and so they'll divulge that information. And so we end up with this concept of social engineering.
Which is back to one of our earlier statements, or I guess Melissa's statement. This is really about the intersection of humans, technology, and policy, and that it isn't always very sophisticated. So as much like the phone call, which has now got a nice word of phishing, is where someone initiates a voice call and asks for I need a password or to reset my password. Things along those lines, or I need you to transfer money. And smishing, which is a little more technically sophisticated, involves using SMS, just the messaging or instant messaging to send, again, asking for some key information that can be used to access the systems or to transfer data or money.
And then phishing emails, everybody hears about phishing, spear phishing being more targeted, but attackers are very, very good at understanding kind of the psychological impact of the information that they send. So we've seen a huge uptake in COVID-19 phishing. So, click here to find out more information about the positive COVID-19 tests that that have been in your local area. And in fact, there was for a while, there was a fake Johns Hopkins website that was set up that looked just like the regular Johns Hopkins website that supposedly had COVID information, but would deliver malware. So they're very, very good at this. The other thing too is if they're in vendor systems, your vendor systems or your business partner systems, they see the type of communications that are going back and forth, and they can target the communication based on whatever that email chain is understanding what you're expecting to see from the next email response, where they interject themselves like a man-in-the-middle attack. We often see this with wire fraud, where they convince somebody that we've changed banking information and therefore they should send the funds to a fraudulent account. And here's the other thing, where we keep talking about people and we'll talk about training, but you only need, in order to fail, if you're having a phishing test done in your organization, in order to fail, you just need one person to click on it.
Yeah, and that it doesn't matter where that person works either. It's anywhere within the organization.
And here we go. So, it's an attempt to obtain sensitive information, access. We are seeing an increase in phishing attempts that have malicious executables. So you open a document and they drop something on your system. Again, attackers are very, very good at this.
So, especially as we move into the evolving situation and moving into 2021, a lot of talk about remote computing and BYOD, the challenges of that, the risks that I think, and I like to call bringing your own home to work, as we all have, is continued to open the door to risks, and it's going in 2021 as we move to hybrid environments and new challenges with new advancing technologies and adoption of technologies, and the threat actors get more complex. It just means that this is all going to become more challenging in securing the remote computing aspects, as well as the risks of remote computing.
And then, the return to office, maybe eventually some point we might return to the office, but any of the security controls or the tools or processes that you put in place to allow people to work from home when you return to the office, if you're going to kind of lock that down, you need to make sure that you're kind of backing out of those so you don't leave vulnerability or weakness within your system because of what you did in order to enable people to do the remote working.
So if I had $10 to spend on securing my organization, I would spend $9.99 on training and awareness. The human is the weakest link, and training is one of the most important pieces.
Organizations spend so much money on security, on tools, on the new software program or endpoint detection and monitoring program that's guaranteed to block ransomware, and then attackers figure out how to bypass it. The employee training and awareness, they are the first line of defense. They know when something doesn't look right, they know when something doesn't operate right, and training them on how to respond, it many times means that you can potentially take steps that help contain and mitigate the damage to the organization. It is honestly one of the most underfunded areas. The other thing too is when you're talking about training, you want it to be relevant. So cybersecurity privacy training doesn't just pertain to the office, but also to how the individual works from home, like their banking, their home computers, their families' home systems, those types of things. So it's relevant, and you can really, I think, make people who are employees who are attending these training environments or training presentations be interested when you talk about it from their perspective. So helping them understand not just how they're protecting the organization, but how they're protecting themselves as well. Do you want to?
And I would just say, in tying, to these, is that, cybersecurity really is, it's everyone's job in the organization. It's not just an IT problem. IT is the mechanism that the problem exists, but cyber is a human problem with where the technology is there, and employees can be the weakest link. And so training all the way through the organization and practice and awareness is practice. It's understanding what things are and why they're important, why to be suspicious of a particular attachment or directions. As I always say, if there's a question, pick up the phone and verify. 2021 training and awareness is going to be key to not just avoiding risk, but getting the businesses back up and running and doing it securely and safely.
So, a little bit more on the legal side, right? Legal compliance and data protection regulations. I think people would be surprised how many different regulations touch what organizations do. And here's, the real big problem here is that regulations that pertain to, security, technology, data lag behind the development of technology. So when companies are developing technologies or developing new products or things along those lines, they've gone, sometimes all the way through the development cycle and into the sales cycle and the implementation cycle before the legislature has really even kind of woken up to the fact that this might be something that we might need to legislate because it can create a risk of health or safety or something along those lines. And then, we're seeing more and more statutes being enacted by different states. There is no really federal statute that applies across the board. And so now you're getting these additional patchwork quilt type of laws that companies are asking you to comply with in your contracts. And we find that oftentimes, people just kind of execute the contract without understanding the implication of the particular regulation they have now agreed to comply with, including the fact that a breach of that regulation could result in statutory fines and penalties. For instance, CCPA, it does have statutory penalties if there is a data breach that requires notice under the California regulation, but it's per record. So think of it, and it pertains to, there's certain jurisdictional thresholds for it, of course, but just because somebody is not in California doesn't mean that that California law doesn't apply to you. So there are a variety of different laws that apply across the board, and more and more of these are working their way into the contractual compliance portion of it, and it can create a risk from a fine, a penalty compliance perspective if organizations aren't aware of and at least addressing the various requirements.
And I would just add, it's certainly in the automotive industry, regulated space having to comply with regulations isn't anything new. But I think that the speed with which the states, as well as other organizations, are implementing new compliance and protections and security guidelines around things, 2021 is going to be very busy trying to figure out which ones have kicked in, which apply, and it's just the complexity, I think, is key to understand that it's not just easy to say, yep, we've checked this box and 2021 will be great. It needs to be monitored, and unfortunately, some of these may only be for larger companies, but it really doesn't matter what you do. You really kind of have to make sure you're resilient to compliance and regulations versus trying to chase them. Sorry, Melissa.
And I think it's important to remember from a privacy perspective, the US originally defined personal information like name plus social security number, those types of things, but the definition of personal information in the US continues to grow. And in some respects, California defines personal information by that information that allows you to identify a household. And so this definition keeps getting broader, and it can be implicated in ways that I think organizations may not realize, so it's important to understand that. But at the end of the day, really developing, implementing, and auditing a compliance program is going to be important. One, it can be an important sales point because you can show whomever you're trying to contract with that you do have this program. But two, it can also substantially mitigate risk and potential fines, again, fees, penalties, litigation associated with non-compliance.
As I like to say is, if it can be connected or it can be connected, it's probably going to be governed at some point. I think data, and it really ties into the more data that you collect, the more data people will want. And in this particular instance, is collecting data for safety purposes to improve the automation on a vehicle. On how does Jeffrey drive? How do you anonymize the fact that it's not Jeffrey driving, but how many little ladies do I hit when I'm driving or come close to hitting? And how does that how does my driving, so slow, create that potential risk? Is again, it's that there's incredible amounts of ones and zeros that are in your industry. Certainly, you know that as well as I do. But that as things become more connected, that the assembly of parts begins to build this larger assembly of ecosystem, and the interplay of ones and zeros and data and pieces of applications creates a very large, growing, hard to measure and scale risk ecosystem, as well as an ecosystem of data that and touch points that are really hard to measure and understand.
Well, I think, Jeffrey, that's a good point about this ecosystem that you're talking about. So, Internet of Things, you hear people talking about this. What does it mean? What does it look like? We're really talking about, network physical objects or things that are connected. So you can have things that are connected to the internet, that's an Internet of Things, or things that connected to themselves that create their own network that are basically Internet of Things. And the more connection points you have, the more complexity. But think of it, people are bringing more and more devices to work. I mean, your watch, your iWatch, whatever. I'm not an iPhone person, just putting it out there. I'm an Android person, but your smartphone, your tablet, your refrigerator, more and more things are connecting to this ecosystem. There's 10 billion Internet of Things devices today, expected to be 22 billion. That's more than double by 2025.
Well, and I'd say too is Internet of Things is also, as Melissa said, it's anything that touches it. It's the microprocessor of control devices, and I think that I read somewhere that your average vehicle has electronic control units, has around 50 of those, with luxury vehicles having over 100. And the amount of data that can process through there with 100 billion lines of code in some vehicles, again, just creates these growing risks and pieces that are important to be aware of, that it's a risk, certainly for 21 and beyond.
So, one of the other items that we talked about is the supply chain risk, right? So what is the supply chain risk? Well, it's the cyber risk to your organization from your supply chain, whether downstream or upstream. A lot of organizations have reliance on vendors for operations, for systems, for integration, for those types of things. Now, imagine if you outsource your IT functions and it's hosted in the cloud, and the cloud goes down. How are you actually going to continue to operate? What are you going to do? How is your systems going to operate? Can you get the data back? Do they have backups or anything along those lines? So, you really have to understand what your supply chain risk is and create, what we call a vendor management program from a due diligence perspective. And there's a variety of ways, and I get it. It's hard to kind of go downstream, and how far downstream do you go? But you can address some of this in your contracts, and you can push that down, require due diligence by any vendors who hire additional vendors. You can shift the risk from a liability perspective. You can include audit requirements. You can include requirements that they have insurance. You can have include requirements that they provide you with certifications for certain security certificates. So there's a variety of things that you can put into that contract to really help either mitigate, reduce, or shift the risk from the supply chain perspective. And then, what if you are the supply chain? Well, it's understanding where you sit in the ecosystem and what your impact, if something happens to you, what your impact is on the upstream and downstream as well. And then, frankly, it's back to this concept of cyber resiliency, really understanding that if something does happen, are you prepared to address it, recover, and respond very quickly?
And I'd say as we look forward to the next 6 to 9 months, Resiliency and risk is going to be, are some keywords, and I'd say in order to, ways to protect your organization going forward for certainly for the next 6 months, training. I can't say that enough. And implementing here a few things, is making sure that you're using multi-factor authentication, not just with your email, but on any application that offers it.
So Jeffrey, real quick, this is the, if you take nothing else away from this presentation, take this away from the presentation. We're really talking about things that are low cost, high return on investment from a protection perspective. Okay, now you can go.
So anyways, there's multi-factor authentication as two ways of ensuring that it's you who's actually using it, backing up and segmenting your network, and then testing the restoration, and making sure those backups work. Training, and I'll let Melissa finish there for me.
Yeah, as you can see, we really emphasize training. Password access control. So, so many organizations have weak passwords, or they allow kind of the iterative password. So, password 1, password 2, password 3, but having really good password controls and access controls. So if you have system IT people, their user account and password, it's a service account, they have a separate user account, so they're not using the same one, that if you don't need it, you don't have access to it. So really locking that down. Cyber insurance, it's right now, my understanding is you can get cyber insurance. They will only ask you a couple questions. I've seen applications that are 5 questions, and you can get sometimes 500,000 up to $1 million on cyber insurance. And cyber insurance does respond to and pay for, many of them do ransomware attacks, provides money for forensics, for legal, for notification, for investigation, for those types of things. And then really looking at security and privacy from the ground up. So when you're implementing new systems or you're creating new products, talking about what security and privacy looks like from the ground up, not just the particular application that the product is intended for, but how others might use the application that you maybe haven't considered. And then finally, again, one more time, training. So we'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions.
Thanks, Melissa and Jeff. We don't, oh wait, one question just came in. How do you determine the level of cyber insurance to purchase? Donna Jackson wants to know.
Yeah, I'll take that. So you want to talk to your broker, but take a look at, a lot of times they'll price it off of the number of records you have, which when you're talking manufacturing really doesn't make sense, but look at it as the number of systems. Frankly, the average ransomware attack or cyber attack usually costs between about 500,000 to about $1 million. So, for the smaller or mid-sized organizations, that might be appropriate. For larger organizations or organizations that service or impact, an incident on you would impact a lot of customers, you might want a higher policy limit.
Okay, that's the only question it looks like that we have.
Okay. I think
covered everything, or we
I'm
missed
sorry.
it?
We have one more that just came in. What are the most common phishing scams you are seeing?
So I probably would say I like to call them whaling, which is where somebody has been able to convince someone in the organization that they're a C-suite or an executive or director, and are offering very sophisticated. The email looks very legitimate. Maybe there's a misspelling in the email address, but it looks like everything looks there, but it's just asking them to do something in a hurry. I'm working remote. I really need you to access this particular file, and can you send it to me right now? Or I'm in a hurry. I really need you to pay this vendor through a wire transfer at this particular time. And so it's I'd say very sophisticated whaling or important customer, but with a sense of urgency, so that there's usually not enough time for someone to verify that this is real.
Okay, we have one more. You mentioned passwords. What are some best practices around good passwords?
So the FTC actually has some good guidance on protecting systems and passwords. And I'll let Jeffrey talk about it from a security perspective, but frankly, we hear, and there's a lot of discussions on using passphrases. So instead of having just a word, using a phrase or something along those lines with a mix of upper and lowercase numbers and symbols as well, and making it long and complex. I mean, frankly, even on your personal accounts at home, you can put multi-factor on those personal accounts and add just an additional layer of security. I mean, certainly email and banking, anything that has access, health system, anything along those lines is where I'd suggest seeing if whatever the particular software platform that you're using can offer that. Anything you want to add, Jeffrey?
Yeah, I'll just build on that. Certainly, passphrases are a lot easier to remember. My dog is biting my leg, 23 or something. But I'd say, in addition to that, I use a password manager, and there are just too many passwords for me to try to remember. A password manager, I can secure that with multi-factor authentication, but it's encrypted. It requires multiple ways to get in, and sometimes there are several of them that are out there that will even provide a password for you to use, a suggested one that meets certain requirements. But I have found passphrases by far for me are much easier to manage than trying to use some sort of complex letters and characters. And it's a lot harder for decryption software to manage, phrases than they are to guess words, and with where the zero or O has been replaced by a zero and things like that.
Okay. So it looks like we have one more. You mentioned training is the most important thing. Who should be trained? All employees or specific groups?
All employees. So all employees, but employees at different levels might get different training that's a little more directed to them and their particular role. So if you're training from an executive or board level, they're obviously going to get a much broader understanding of the risks from kind of a very broad perspective, but they should also understand the particular risks in that industry and as it relates to the organization. Low-level employees, maybe the receptionist would understand just they're a target of people calling them, asking for information, for phishing emails, those types of things. And so they're going to be a little more directed towards, recognizing, responding to cybersecurity incidents. But absolutely, all employees should get trained.
I second that.
Okay, I think that's all for questions.
I think we...
I'm sorry. Every time I say that, one more comes through. Are there organizations, associations, et cetera, out there that companies can connect with to get cybersecurity info on an ongoing basis?
So, there's, I assume we're talking sort of about the threats that are out there, and there are these information sharing organizations that different industries have set up, that as well as DHS has partnerships with their ISACs, if you will, that share best practice in industry. NIST also is, along with the DHS, puts out almost I get them hourly, but alerts around the current threats. There's but I'd say the ISACs and the industry, and I believe there's also an auto ISAC. I need to verify the actual acronym for that one, but they're in general, I would say is any ISAC is really a good place to find out what the current threats are, as well as mitigation tools and techniques that are available. I hope that was the question.
Okay, I think that should be it for questions.
So I think Lori takes back over, if I recall correctly.
That is correct. Thank you so much for your time today in the presentation. It was great information. And to all the participants today, I will tell you that you will get an email from me later this afternoon with a link to today's presentation. If there's any information you want to look back on, you can always visit our website as well, detroitchamber.com/COVID-19 for more resources and information on upcoming webinars, teletown halls, and things that can help you and your business. Thank you for your time today. I thank Clark Hill for their time today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Everyone stay well. Stay happy.
Thank you.